My name is Derek Morgan, and I used to believe that love could erase the lines drawn by money, class, and pedigree. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, where the winters bite and the paycheck barely stretches. My mom was a waitress who worked 2 shifts at the truck stop off Route 62, and my hands have known the weight of socket wrenches since I was 12. Fixing things was second nature. I was the guy people called when their engine sputtered or their furnace groaned at midnight. So, when I met Alina Cartwright, a woman who belonged to a world of linen napkins, Ivy League alumni, and champagne brunches, I thought I'd stumbled into something magical. She wore pearls like they were stitched to her skin, but she laughed at my corny jokes and didn't flinch at the grease on my sleeves. I convinced myself we were equals, that love had leveled the playing field between her penthouse and my garage. For 7 years, I tried to fit into that world. I swapped oil-stained flannels for tailored shirts, memorized wine pairings, and smiled through endless parties where I was introduced as Alina's fiancé. He runs a repair shop. But the cracks were always there, just beneath the surface, hidden behind tight smiles and compliments laced with disdain, especially from her mother, Margaret, a woman who wielded passive aggression like a violin bow. The final blow didn't come in some cinematic argument or thunderstorm exit. No, it happened at our wedding reception, of all places. We were seated at the long, flower-draped table under fairy lights and violin music, surrounded by everyone she loved and barely anyone I knew. I was adjusting my cufflink when Margaret leaned in and, in her velvet voice that always managed to sting, whispered to the guest beside her, "I still can't believe she married the guy who fixed her brakes." And they laughed. Not just a polite chuckle, real laughter. My wife didn't flinch. She didn't say a word. She just sipped her wine like nothing had happened. That night, as the party carried on and the music swelled, I sat alone on the hotel balcony, watching the city lights blur into static. My chest was tight. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the silent realization that I didn't belong. And maybe I never had. The morning after the wedding was supposed to feel like a fresh beginning. But as I lay awake in the dim bridal suite, sunlight creeping across the ivory curtains, all I could feel was emptiness. Alina was already up, laughing quietly on the phone with her cousin, as if the night before hadn't happened, as if her silence hadn't carved something open inside me. The night of the wedding had unraveled like a slow leak in a tire. No blowout, just a soft hiss until I was too flat to keep moving. The reception was a swirl of clinking glasses, speeches from old money relatives, and Margaret parading me like a charity case she'd graciously allowed into the family. "Derek, maybe you could start a mobile tire service for our neighborhood," she'd said loudly, enough for the nearby table to hear, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. The room chuckled politely. I smiled, tight, practiced, but my grip on the wine glass had turned white-knuckled. I waited for Alina to say something. She didn't. She smiled at her mother and raised her glass. It wasn't the first time, but it was the most public. Every time her family dismissed me, I had convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. Alina always told me, "Just ignore it, Derek. They don't mean it. You know how my mom is." But when you've heard the same joke 100 different ways, the punchline becomes the truth. What made it worse was how much I'd tried. I'd built bridges with her brother Patrick, endured wine tastings where I didn't recognize a single name on the label, and learned to hold my fork in that ridiculous European grip just so I wouldn't be corrected again. I gave up Sundays at the garage to attend brunches filled with opera gossip and hedge fund talk, nodding like I belonged. But I didn't. That night, after her father's speech about welcoming blue-collar resilience into the family, I excused myself and went upstairs alone. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted silence. Alina was still downstairs, chatting in the lobby like nothing was wrong. Maybe for her, nothing was. She'd gotten the fairy tale wedding, the string quartet, the family name she could keep untarnished. I was just the footnote, the local mechanic who looked good in a tux, but didn't quite blend in with the marble floors and champagne flutes. I stared at myself in the mirror, the top button of my shirt undone, my tie resting in a heap on the floor. My reflection looked tired, like a man caught halfway between love and the realization he was utterly alone. Not alone in the physical sense, people buzzed around us constantly, but alone in the way that makes your chest feel hollow, even when the room is full. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I was numb. A slow, sinking realization pressed against my ribs. This wasn't just a bad moment. It was a pattern. A 7-year pattern of laughing off their digs, of swallowing my pride so Alina wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. I'd mistaken survival for acceptance. I'd confused endurance with belonging. And that silence from her, the one that allowed her mother's comment to hang in the air without correction, that silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. Eventually, Alina came upstairs. She was glowing, still riding the high of the evening, and asked why I'd slipped away. I told her I wasn't feeling well, that I needed air. She kissed my cheek, called me dramatic, and slipped into the bathroom to take off her makeup. I watched her as she moved about the room, humming to herself. She didn't notice the look on my face. She didn't see the crack that had split down the center of what we built. I think she thought it would pass, like all the other times. But this one was different. This one had a name. Silence. And I wasn't sure I could live with it anymore. The morning after the wedding, I made my choice before the sun rose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam doors or demand apologies. I simply packed a small black carry-on, each item folded with mechanical precision. 2 flannels, a pair of jeans, some thermal socks, my old leather notebook. I left the ring, silver, plain, and now absurdly heavy, on the nightstand. I didn't write a note. I figured my silence would speak louder than any letter ever could. By 6 a.m., I was at the airport with a one-way ticket to Alaska. I chose Alaska because it was the furthest place I could find from everything fake, from marble foyers and champagne glasses, from Alina's family dinners and the polished voices that dripped with venom behind pleasantries. I wanted raw air, cold enough to sting. I wanted silence that wasn't passive-aggressive, but real, clean, and empty. The town I ended up in didn't have a name most people would recognize. It had 2 diners, 1 gas station, and a population that dipped below 500 in the winter. That's exactly what I needed. The cabin I rented was barely a cabin. 3 small rooms, stacked with dusty firewood, creaky floorboards, and a stove that rattled when it lit. The locals didn't ask questions. They didn't care where I came from or why I had calluses that looked like they'd faded from working hands. One older man, his name was Joe, watched me chop wood the first week and simply said, "You work hard. That's enough here." That single sentence undid something inside me. For weeks, I let the quiet rebuild me. I fixed generators when they sputtered. I helped Joe with his old fishing boat, redoing the electrical panel with parts I scavenged from the dump. I kept to myself, only nodding in the bar, only ordering black coffee from the diner. They started calling me Quiet Derek, and that was fine by me. It meant I belonged, in my own way, without needing to perform or shrink. The nights were long in Alaska, real long. Darkness that stretched for hours, the kind that made you face yourself. I'd sit on the front porch of the cabin, bundled in a wool coat, staring at the stars, so many they didn't feel real. And in that quiet, memories would creep in. Alina's laughter, the way she used to say my name before everything got twisted by her family's expectations. But the pain didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt more like a bruise I was no longer afraid to press. One day in town, I helped a single mother get her truck started in the freezing cold. She didn't thank me with words. She just handed me a hot thermos of soup and a nod. That moment, simple as it was, made more sense to me than every empty compliment I'd ever received in her parents' mansion. I wasn't angry in the usual way, no slamming fists or shouting into the void. My rage was quieter. It simmered like the old stove in my cabin, low, consistent heat. It burned through the parts of me that used to shrink at every correction, every sideways glance from her mother. It melted the need to prove myself. In time, I started journaling again, just scribbles at first. What I fixed that day, how the snow looked different depending on the sky. But eventually, words turned into thoughts I hadn't dared say out loud before. Thoughts like, maybe I was never broken. Maybe they just didn't know how to see someone whole. I think what surprised me most wasn't how easy it was to disappear, but how little anyone tried to find me. No calls, no messages, no one asking if I was okay. Not even Alina. And somehow, that silence gave me more closure than any conversation ever could. I didn't miss her. I missed the version of me I used to be before I twisted myself to fit into her world. And in Alaska, I found him again. Quiet, hard-working, unpolished Derek. The guy who didn't need wine pairings and dinner etiquette. The guy who just needed air that didn't smell like expectation. By the time the ice began to thaw and spring whispered through the pine trees, something in me had shifted. Not overnight, not in some grand moment of awakening, but slowly, like the frozen ground beneath my feet beginning to soften. The man who had stumbled into this town with a duffel bag and a broken heart was no longer the one looking back in the mirror. One of the earliest signs of change came in the form of muddy paw prints on my porch. A stray dog, ribs poking through fur the color of ash, started showing up around dusk each day. At first, he kept his distance, circling just beyond the firelight. But I left food anyway, no questions asked. After a week, he let me sit beside him. After 2, he let me touch his head. I named him Mason. Mason followed me everywhere, through snow-covered trails, into town, even to the dock where I'd started helping Joe and a few of the other old-timers repair boats in the early mornings. He didn't bark, he didn't beg. He just showed up, steady and loyal. I saw myself in that mutt, scarred, quiet, still standing. The dock work turned into something more. When a late spring storm tore through the coast, snapping boards and flooding half the loading area, I stayed up for 36 hours with the town crew fixing it. No one asked. I just showed up. When the last bolt was tightened, the mayor, an older woman named Rhea with a thick braid of silver hair and eyes that didn't miss a thing, clapped me on the back and said, "You ever think about working for the town?" 2 weeks later, I had a key to the ferry system's maintenance bay and a regular paycheck. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing respect. It was finding me. At night, I signed up for online courses in marine electrical systems, something I never had time for when I was dancing between the expectations of people who judged me for everything I wasn't. I passed my first certification in under a month. By summer, I was handling not just maintenance, but system upgrades. People started calling me Tech Derek around town. I didn't mind the name. I'd earned it. What surprised me most wasn't just how much I was capable of, but how easily people let me be enough. I didn't have to dress a certain way. I didn't have to prove my worth in some sterile room full of judgmental stares. If I showed up and did good work, that was all that mattered. Sarah, the woman who ran the general store, started leaving fresh bread in a paper bag on my doorstep once a week. Pete, who ran a local charter boat, would text me when his system glitched. Joe invited me to dinner once a month. We didn't talk about emotions or trauma. We just shared space. And somehow, that healed me more than any therapy session ever could. Then, one evening, as I was oiling the gears in the dock's winch house, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. Reception in that corner of town was always spotty, but something nudged me. It was a message from Alina. "I see it now," it read. "I'm sorry." 7 words. Just 7. I stared at them for a while. Not with anger, not even hurt. Just stillness. I didn't feel tempted to reply. I didn't feel the ache of unfinished business or the need to explain my silence. Because I understood now. She had her chance. Her silence back then, when I needed her most, spoke louder than any apology could now. I had new roots, not in bloodlines or family crests or legacy homes perched on cliffs, but in people who measured you by what you gave, not what you wore. In a town where my name meant something, not because of who I married, but because of how I showed up. I set the phone down beside me on the workbench and returned to the winch gears. Mason lay at my feet, tail thumping slowly, like he understood exactly what that moment meant. A man can spend his whole life chasing the wrong kind of love, forgetting that respect is a kind of love too, one that doesn't demand you shrink to fit inside someone else's frame. That night, I stood on the dock with a wrench in one hand and salt wind in my lungs, and I smiled. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming. It had been nearly a year since I walked out of that cold mansion on the cliff and into the life I was always meant to live. The studio by the sea, the scent of salt in the air, the hum of early morning ferries, all of it had become my rhythm. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. Mason and I had settled into a quiet groove. My days were filled with honest work, community smiles, and the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you have nothing left to prove. I didn't look back. Not at the condo, not at the cold dinners, not at the silence from Alina when I needed her the most. But life has a strange way of circling back. Sometimes not to test you, but to show you how far you've come. One rainy afternoon in early fall, a documentary crew rolled into town. They were filming a miniseries called Rebuilding America, focused on communities that had weathered hardship and found renewal through everyday heroes. They stopped by the docks, heard about the guy who'd helped fix the town's systems after the storm, who showed up when no one asked, who taught himself marine tech online and never once looked for praise. That guy was me. At first, I refused to be on camera. I didn't want the spotlight. But Rhea, the mayor, talked me into it. "You're part of what held us together, Derek," she said. "Let people know what quiet strength looks like." So I did the interview. I told them about Mason, about waking up in a motel with no plan and finding roots in a town I'd never heard of. I spoke not with bitterness, but clarity, about what it meant to walk away from a life that looked good on the outside, but was slowly killing me from within. The episode aired 3 months later. I didn't expect much, but it caught fire. From mechanic to hero, the man who rebuilt a town. That was the headline. A clip went viral. Me standing by the dock, wind in my hair, Mason by my side, talking about how sometimes the bravest thing a man can do isn't fight to stay, but choose to walk away. Comments poured in. "That's the kind of man I want my son to grow up to be. This is what healing looks like. He built his own peace. Someone from Alina's circle shared it. Her cousin, I think. The one who used to joke that I didn't belong at the family table. A mutual friend tagged her in the comments. Is this the Derek? The garage guy? The garage guy. The one who wasn't good enough. The one who didn't wear the right clothes or speak in polished sentences. Yes, that's me. And I wasn't just someone's ex-husband anymore. I was a man who mattered. To a town, to a crew, to a dog who trusted me, to people I'd never met who saw something true in my story. Alina never reached out again. I think she understood now that silence was my answer. She had her chance, her moment to stand beside me when it mattered. She chose the table, I chose the door. And the world? It had opened up. I started getting invitations to speak at trade schools, to mentor young men in town, to write a column in a regional publication about resilience. I accepted some, declined others, not out of pride, but because I finally had a say. I even upgraded the studio, bought a little cottage on the hill, nothing fancy, just a porch that caught the evening breeze and enough room for Mason to stretch out in the sun. My sister Ellie came to visit again, this time with her 2 boys. We grilled on the porch, watched Booker chase gulls. She hugged me hard before she left, whispered, "Dad would be proud." That stuck with me, because for years I thought I'd disappointed him, choosing love over legacy, emotion over ambition. But now, standing in boots that had carried me far from that cliffside dinner table, I knew better. I hadn't failed. I'd evolved. The man who once begged to be accepted became a man who accepted himself. The man who once built systems in the shadows was now helping rebuild lives in the light. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was known, and I was respected. That was more than enough. So here I am now, a full year later, watching the sun dip beneath the ocean from my own back porch. The breeze carries the scent of pine and brine. Mason snores beside my chair, and my laptop blinks with a dozen new emails. None of them from the past, only the future. And it looks damn good. I never imagined that peace could be so simple. That healing could look like a small rented cottage by the sea, a dog snoring beside me, and a town that didn't care about where I came from, only about who I was willing to be. Looking back, every step mattered. The first confrontation at that long, cold dinner table, the quiet collapse in our guest room when Alina chose their silence over my voice, the midnight drive into the unknown, and the choice to start over in Oregon, not because I was lost, but because I was ready to be found, by myself. That journey taught me something I never learned growing up, or during the 7 years I spent trying to fit into someone else's world. You don't have to earn love by shrinking yourself. Real belonging doesn't require costumes, compromises, or swallowing your pride at a table that was never set for you. I used to think I had to justify my presence, to prove I was good enough for the suit, for the title, for the girl with the glass of red wine who never spoke up when I needed her most. But out here, under wide Oregon skies, I discovered that I was always enough. I just needed to step away from people who couldn't see it. Now, when I look at my life, it's quiet, but not empty. It's full of meaning. The friends who greet me by name, the clients who trust me, the waves that crash in steady rhythm like a song written just for me, Mason at my feet, the smell of coffee on the breeze, and the freedom to be exactly who I am without apologies. I don't hate Alina. I don't even resent her anymore. She made her choice, and I made mine. And in the end, maybe the real love story wasn't about marriage or reunions. It was about a man finding his voice, standing his ground, and choosing to be seen, even if it meant standing alone. Only I wasn't alone. Not really. I had myself. And that turned out to be more than enough. So if you're reading this and you've ever felt like you weren't enough for someone's world, let me say this. You don't have to stay where you're merely tolerated. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to build a new life. And yes, you're allowed to be happy. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, leave a comment, share your own journey, or just say hi. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths, and this channel is where they get heard.